one of my first things I did as mayor back in '04 when I got elected is I took a trip down to Charleston to learn a little bit about and look at the lab and see sort of how to do it right. And I had the chance to sit next to Mayor Riley for 3 days in the aquarium and sort of just be a sponge. He had been mayor for almost as many years as I had been days at that point. It was my 45th day on the job, and I think he was 32nd year as mayor. So it was just a great opportunity for me to learn from the master and in a great community. So, and what came out of that meeting for me was the big idea was, as you see here, these blast furnaces, which are kind of, they were just big rusting hulks, 20 stories tall. And at the time when I was running for mayor in early stages, the big discussion was what to do with these things. And they are right in our downtown. They are a bit almost like a piece of our skyline. And one of the first things that you'd look for when you came to Bethlehem, and imagine these things with flames shooting out of them. It was 1995 is when they shut the blast furnaces down. So it really became, and they were and hopefully could be again an iconic symbol of the city. But in this case, they were sort of a symbol of the past and what we had lost. So, but as a part of that Mayor's Institute for City Design, the experts that were there said, Callahan, save as many of the old sheds, the old machine shops as you can. They call them sheds, but you can't touch those blast furnaces. So they will be the backdrop for whatever takes place on that site. You have to figure out a way to save them and celebrate them. And as you can see, we kind of lit them up as a piece of sculpture. And we created some parks and plazas around there. And so this idea was essentially stolen from Germany. I also had a chance to go and visit the Ruhr Valley and there's in Saarbrücken, and they kind of treated they have a set of blast furnaces similar to these, not as nice as ours, but similar, and they did a similar treatment to them. So we kind of took the ideas from them. But as Tom said, we were the quintessential mill town, the Bethlehem of Bethlehem steel. Much of the steel that built, defended, and transported this country was made either in Bethlehem or at another Bethlehem steel plant outside of Bethlehem. At its peak, the Bethlehem plant employed 35,000 people in a city of 75,000, just to give you a little perspective on how important it was, certainly to Bethlehem, the city, but the entire region. It really is what drove our economy. So the steel for the Chrysler Building, the steel for the Golden Gate Bridges, we produced a ship a day during the war effort in World War II. So it was, so we felt obviously that this site was important regionally, but going to some of these other larger national events and international events helped me understand that this site had some importance even beyond our region. And we had an obligation in Bethlehem to preserve as much of it as we could. So it's an 1,800-acre site. I went to an event early on in my time as mayor with a mayor's panel. And the mayor, I said, I have an 1,800-acre brownfield site in my city. And after we got to the break, the mayor of Terre Haute, Indiana, came to me and says, "Did you say you have he thought I said 180 acres. I said 180 acres, we can do that in our sleep in Bethlehem." So it's a site that represented 20% of the taxable land mass of the city. And so when it went from an operating steel mill to a brownfield site, Bethlehem Steel rightly went back and reassessed the property. And so you could see our tax base really just fell off the cliff. So they were a giant water user. They used about a third of the water that our municipality produced to make steel. So we were sort of getting hit on all ends from the standpoint of the impact to our economy and our ability to balance budgets and deliver services. So as Tom said, you never have money for any of this stuff, but we had no money at all for given what was happening to us. So because it's such a large site, it could be a lot of things to a lot of folks, and I'm not going to talk about all 1,800 acres, but this is 1,600 acres of the site that was redeveloped as a business park. We had a local not-for-profit private redevelopment group that took about 1,000 acres of the site, and they put infrastructure in place, and they've sold off these lots to private developers, small lots and then the Majestic Realty out of California bought about 450 acres of the site. And they're in the process, they're about halfway done now, of building about 8 million square feet of logistics and warehousing. So the site has great rail access. 80% of the lots have rail access, and sort of taking advantage of the fact that we're about 60 miles from here, and Bethlehem in general is about a day's ride to a third of the country's population. So it's a great center for those types of uses. It's a brownfield site, so it was a great opportunity for us to cap that site with these large buildings and working with the federal government and in particular with the state. This was really the first example of Act 2 and brownfield regulations in Pennsylvania. So we worked very closely with the governor's office and with DEP to get this site shovel ready for new investment. And that certainly has had and continues to have a positive impact on the city's budget. This whole 1,600 acres is tax abated, graduated tax abatement over 10 years. So you pay 10% of your real estate taxes in the first year, 20% your second year over the course of 10 years. So that was one particular economic development tool that we used there. I'm going to focus in on kind of the 124 acres that's in town, the historic part of the site. This is what it looked like in 2009. You can see that there are some new roads there. The city, we created a TIF district around this Beth Works site, the old steel plant, and we did a Section 108 loan early on to put the infrastructure in place in the hopes that private development would come and pay for it through the TIF. And to be quite honest with you, not a lot happened. We were fortunate that Bethlehem Steel, us being kind of the namesake of the company as it was moving into bankruptcy, and they put a lot of money into remediation and demolition on the site. They probably spent about $30 million in the waning years of Bethlehem Steel before they went into bankruptcy in 2001, essentially deconstructing the site so that we'd have an opportunity down the road to fill in, do some infill, and reconstruct the site. But despite our best efforts with this TIF and trying to lay the groundwork and priming the pump, not a lot happened. Fast forward to today, this is what the site looks like. And I'll go through the various components of it. But really, for us, the game changer was when Pennsylvania passed gaming in the state. We were successful in getting one of the two at-large gaming licenses. We partnered up with Las Vegas Sands. So an investment group out of New York bought the site prior to gaming, and then they ultimately partnered up with Las Vegas Sands to build what is the most successful casino in Pennsylvania. So with this casino comes a $10 million host fee to the city. That certainly helps balance the budget and deliver good services. I think if you look at the publication that Tom and his colleagues put together, the first part of it, and I don't want to lose, kind of being the mayor up here, the first part of setting the stage for development is clean and safe. You really have to make, and we are the safest city in Pennsylvania with a population over 30,000. So unless people feel safe that they can come to your town in the first place, you can build all the best attractions in the world and they're not likely going to come. So unless you're doing a good job balancing budgets and delivering good city services, that really is the ultimate setting of the stage. So we used, this project cost about $850 million. It opened up in 2009. And so when you drop an $850 million project into a TIF district, good things will happen. And so this shed an awful lot of, so we had a couple of opportunities to site the casino in various areas of the city. It was a little risky to put it on the old steel site. They took over kind of one of the most difficult sites to redevelop. They spent a lot of money on infrastructure and investment to get it shovel ready, and we dropped it within the TIF. So as you might imagine, being a colonial city that dates back to 1741, there wasn't a lot of excitement about gaming initially in the city. But because we were able to tie this development to historic preservation, this development to lighting the blast furnaces, this development to building this arts and cultural campus, people were willing to go along with it. Plus, the economics were rather compelling. So the casino site is on your right, and the Steel Stacks campus is on the left. So you have a couple of entities. You have the Arts Quest Center. We have the largest free music festival in the country is in Bethlehem. We attract about 1.2 million people over the course of 10 days. It's in our historic downtown on the north side, but the organization that runs that built the Arts Quest Center at the base of the blast furnaces. We have a local public television station also at the base of the blast furnaces, and these two projects were privately funded through new market tax credits, state grants, foundation donors, and they went out and floated some debt as well with a bank. So those two projects were privately funded, through those two not-for-profit organizations. But everything around it, the entire campus, the hardscape was all funded through this TIF. We brought on Wallace, Roberts, and Todd to work on the architecture, the landscape architecture plan. This is a Levitt Pavilion. The Levitt Pavilions, there's I think 6 or 7 in these now in the country. We were the 6th one that got put up. They're generally in some pretty cool cities. and we wanted to introduce some green to the area. This was another idea that we sort of stole from Germany, the opportunity to have concerts. So we have 50 free concerts on this lawn with the big, beautiful blast furnaces in the background. So this pavilion was about a $4 million project. $500,000 came from the Levitt Foundation, and along with that comes some funding for programming through the Levitt, and then we augment that with Arts Quest, who are already having free concerts, and now we just sort of augmented that with a summer series. Took the oldest building on the site, an 1862 stockhouse, and did a meticulous restoration of this building, and is now the visitor center for the city. I wish I had a before picture, but it was quite a fixer-upper when we took it on. And the project that just opened last year in 2015 is called the Hoover Mason Trestle, and it's sort of our Bethlehem version of the High Line. This is an old elevated rail line that would take the raw materials from the ore pit and the coke to the blast furnaces to be dumped in, and these conveyors would take it to the top. So we sort of use this trestle to act as kind of a spine to run east and west on the site and connect both the casino, which was a huge investment and a node of activity. The casino attracts about 8.5 million visitors a year, and this particular site, Steel Stacks, attracts about 1 million people a year over the course of the year. So together we've got a site now that 10 million people have an opportunity to enjoy. And a site that not too long ago, as I said, back in 1998 is when they ceased all operations, and it was a padlocked site that no one could reach. Everyone kind of wanted to get to it, but they couldn't. And now it's a site that 10 million people have an opportunity to enjoy. So I'm going to just run through some of the pictures just to give you a sense of what this site looks like at night. I mean, the real heroes in this, I think, are our lighting architects. They did a wonderful job on the site, and it takes on just a completely different feel in the evening. You see people get an opportunity to get an up-close and personal view of the blast furnaces themselves, but you also get a chance to sort of look back on the complex and get a completely different perspective on the rest of the site and the city itself. But the scale of these blast furnaces are rather dramatic. That's a placemaking sculpture that we got a half of it. The grant dollars came from the mayor's, the MICD 25. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, and the half of it came from a foundation grant. And that you'll see in a future picture that we call it the bridge, but that actually lights up with natural gas over on the spine of the project. So this is what the site looks like during Music Fest. Again, all these tools that everybody uses, we use them, as well. But TIF really for us was the driving factor. But we've done historic preservation tax credits. We've done new markets. As I said, the Section 108 loan, CDBG dollars. It is a low moderate income census tract, so those dollars are available for us as well. The city did geodebt, and we took an old abandoned rail line and created a rails to trail project. In which I also convinced the Sands to make a fairly significant investment in as well. And then you have the investment of Arts Quest and the PBS group. And the state of Pennsylvania really was a huge help, not only with their brownfield legislation and helping us through the Act 2 process and making it so that a private entity would feel confident to come in here and redevelop it without fear of the environmental ramifications, but they also contributed major dollars in the context of grants to these organizations. And I guess I would close by saying that at the end of the day, we didn't have a choice. Tom mentioned that some of this has to be intentional, but when 20% of your city is a brownfield site, you better get going on redeveloping it. But I think we did it in a way that we were patient, we were persistent, and we wanted to sort of build upon our past. So let's figure out what makes Bethlehem unique and special. If you know Bethlehem, it's because of Bethlehem Steel, and because of Lehigh University. Those are probably the two reasons why anyone would know anything about the city of Bethlehem. And so, let's take our past and use it as a bridge to a brighter future and build upon that uniqueness in the 125 years of steelmaking history in the city. And so we're not done yet. There's still, I was term limited, so I now work on the development side with the gentleman that originally bought the site to try to introduce sort of office and residential to the rest of the site. We've got you know, the live, everybody wants live, work, play. We've got the entertainment and the play down. From Thursday to Sunday, this place is jumping, and particularly in the evenings. But what we need to do now is make it a 24-hour site and a 7-day-a-week site. And we're introducing residential to the site this year. We're very bullish on that. So all these kind of amenities that a millennial or an empty nester would want in their development are there now. The public, and it's open to the public. It's as another kind of Rileyism is the public realm should be your best places in the city. And this is a must go to. It went from a place that you kind of would turn your back to and don't look there, and now it's like the place to go, and it's one of the most unique places you could be. It's one of the more unique economic development projects in the country, and now we're wading through. And there's some other incentives that are unique to our site that I won't get into, but we think the next wave will be residential and office on the site.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Anastasia Milan is from 3CDC in Cincinnati. She'll explain to you what 3CDC is. It is a very interesting model that I think a lot of cities ought to look at because it is privately driven rather than publicly driven in the redevelopment of a downtown and a very blighted urban neighborhood. So with that, Anastasia, why don't you start?
How many of you have been to Cincinnati?
Here we go.
How many have been in the last, say, 6, 7, 8 years? Okay. I had met a couple of women who are in merchandising at Macy's last night that hadn't been to Cincinnati. Actually, one of them had, because Macy's is headquartered in Cincinnati, but the other one hadn't been in 12 years. And she's like, I didn't really like it. It kind of rolled up at night. There wasn't anything going on there. The company that I work for is a private nonprofit real estate development group. And unlike Steve and John's stories, there's some similarities. We had a visionary mayor who really kickstarted the formation of our organization. But everything that I'm going to talk about that has happened over the past 10 years in Cincinnati is very specific to one organization called the Cincinnati Center City Development Corporation. So while we're a private nonprofit real estate development group, we do have a great public-private partnership with the city. But all of this work has really been done by one organization, and I think the success of it can be attributed to all of the major corporations that are headquartered in our city, and that's Procter & Gamble, Macy's, Western and Southern, Duke, to name a few, Kroger, who kind of looked at our city a decade, 2 decades ago and said, we have to do something about economic development. It's not happening. We're here to stay. We're headquartered here. We want to grow our businesses here, and we want to recruit the best and the brightest to live here and work here. And there's just not much going on in our center city. And so this group that was really formed as a task force by our mayor at the time, Charlie Lucan, to study how economic development was done in our city, kind of put their money where their mouths were and pooled their funds, a total of $50 million in the beginning, to create this private, nonprofit real estate development group. The city's economic development department really wasn't getting it done, and the private corporation said we got to do something about this. And so the primary focus and mission for this organization was the center city, and really 2 main areas. If you look at the screen, this is a funny map because it's sort of flipped upside down. The river is to the south of the city, but it's up in the top right corner of your screen. But the green square shows the central business district, and the heart of the CBD is called Fountain Square, and this is a 2-acre public space really in the center of CBD that at the time was sort of blocked off from any pedestrian or traffic that could walk up on the square. It was a pretty desolate space where nothing really happened much except for some homeless people hanging out, begging, and a couple of annual events, a lighting of the tree ceremony, but really not a great public space at all in the heart of that central business district. And consequently, there was little activity happening around it. And then the red square you see here is a neighborhood just north of the CBD called Over-the-Rhine. And Over-the-Rhine had suffered through many decades of disinvestment to the point where it was built in the 1800s by German immigrants. There's a street between these 2 squares that used to be the Miami-Erie Canal that the German immigrants affectionately referred to as the Rhine, and they would work in the CBD or work on the riverbanks and then cross the Rhine to get to the neighborhood they built, so it was called over-the-rhine. And in its heyday, there were 50,000 people living in these 3, 4, 5-story walk-ups, Italianate Renaissance-style structures, beautiful multifamily above and street-level activity, lots of breweries. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was really a bustling place to be. Fast forward, obviously all the economic indicators that happened in these Rust Belt cities, people moved out to the hills when the car was invented. Over the years, many of the buildings were converted into subsidized housing units, that the tax credits ran out and the out-of-town owners let them fall into disrepair, and then the federal government changed the program and gave people vouchers, so they voted with their feet and left. And ultimately what we were left with was this incredible collection that ultimately became a historic district of 943 historic buildings that were crumbling and vacant, and that were attracting crime, really significant crime that was spilling over into the central business district and really just wreaking havoc on the city. So it was the vacancy and the fact that the city had really just sort of turned its back on the area and was just letting crime run rampant. And then at the point where it spilled over in the CBD, this is really the turning point, I think, for all the major corporations. We got to do something about this, and this is a major focus of this new group that we've put together. This is a list of the folks that are on our board. They, in the very beginning, contributed. It really paid for about 95% of our operating budget. Today, they still contribute the same $1.2 million, but it makes up about 15% of our operating budget. We've grown significantly in both the assets that we manage and the employees that are putting the real estate projects together. Also, since that first $50 million loan fund pooled to go after New Markets tax credits, we've created some new funds and revolved, once projects have, condos have sold and projects have paid down their debt, returned it into these new loan funds that together have totaled about $154 million. But as we've invested in real estate projects over the years and rolled them over, so we've used these. We've also applied for actually 7 rounds of New Markets fund allocations and received 5 allocations through 5 of those rounds, totaling about $200 million that we've invested in this. So those revolving loan funds, and together with the New Markets tax credits, historic tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, we have produced real estate projects in downtown Cincinnati totaling $926 million over the past 8 or 9 years. About $347 million of that has been from 3CDC's loan funds that we manage and revolve into these projects. And $464 million has been attracted from private. So for example, if we're building a headquarters building for Dunnhumby or 8451, they'll bring half of the public or the private dollars to the table, and then we'll fund the rest. So 464 of that 926 has come from private, and then about $115 million from the city in the form of TIF and grants. And that $926 million has resulted in this list here of 144 historic buildings restored in both the CBD and over the Rhine, 50 new buildings constructed, 15 acres of civic space, and this includes that Fountain Square that makes up 2 acres in the heart of the Central Business District, and then 8 acres of a park that is in the heart of the over the Rhine neighborhood that we restored and now manage. And then another about 4.5 acres that we are currently under construction, a different park in that same over the Rhine neighborhood. And these parks and the Fountain Square, these civic spaces were really similar to their surrounding neighborhood, attracting crime. It wasn't a place where kids went to play. There were hypodermic needles lying all over the ground and really bad activity happening in these spaces that once renovated, that we now program and manage, are hubs of activity. They're some of the most democratic places in the city where people of all walks of life come together and enjoy free music concerts and festivals and markets and yoga nights and movie nights. And we've built 679 apartments, and this runs from the riverfront all the way up into over the Rhine. and then 421 condominiums, again in those main blocks that I showed on the earlier slide. 156 hotel rooms, 320 shelter beds. We just finished a major homeless to homes project where we built 3 new facilities, one women only, one substance abuse facility for men, and one safe step-up shelter that really just takes anybody that needs to come in off the street. All 3 of those facilities at a total of 320 beds were completed last year. And then about 853,000 square feet of commercial space, and about half of that is an office building in the CBD, but a large portion of this is, scattered small 1,000 square foot spaces around over-the-Rhine that we have tenanted with 26 new bars and restaurants that are occupy maybe 51,000 square feet of that, and have gross revenues of about 43. They're doing probably an average of $700 bucks a square foot, these restaurants in these tiny spaces. Some of them are doing north of $1,000 bucks a square foot in these restaurant spaces. Retail office users as well. And then about 3,500 parking spaces. So this is what we've done just in the past 10 years or less with this $926 million, is really created these structures and transformed both the central business district, but primarily this over-the-Rhine neighborhood that had fallen into such disrepair. So not only has 3CDC been a real estate developer, but we also have moved into now this asset management role. So not only are we managing and programming civic spaces, but we have retained ownership of all the commercial spaces that we've built. We carefully curate the tenants that we put into them and manage those spaces and have hung on to them. We have an operating budget, 3CDC, of about $8.3 million this year, and half of that comes from revenue, comes from development fees. About another quarter of that comes from resource sharing allowance, where we pay ourselves to manage those loan funds. And the other quarter is split between those corporate contributions mentioned earlier and the management fees that we are paid to manage those assets. We have 69 full-time employees and about 75 part-time seasonal employees that fall into that operating budget. And really on the expenses side, the employees and the payroll make up about 70% of the expenses. We're governed by a board, an executive committee, and then a committee that focuses on each aspect of our business. So an asset committee, a development and finance committee that really analyzes every real estate project that we want to take on and how we're going to finance it. And every project is its own entity, which is then managed by the finance group. And then we have an events and sponsorship committee that really analyzes how we manage those civic spaces, which again are their own entities. Fountain Square is a $5 million entity. We create all the revenue through sponsorship and concession sales to produce free programming in these civic spaces. And the parks are a similar financing model. Like other CDCs around the country, we have similar priorities. We want to create and manage great civic spaces and create high-density mixed-use development, preserve historic structures whenever we can, and repair streetscapes, and then create these really mixed-income, diverse neighborhoods that support all walks of life, that provide job opportunities, that provide a bell curve of housing options for every type of subsidized housing to market rate, affordable. We've introduced a for sale element into this neighborhood of over-the-Rhine that didn't exist before. There was really virtually no ownership to speak of, and so by creating these for sale opportunities and selling these condominiums, we've got buy-in from the community and into keeping their neighborhood clean and safe. And I'm going to run through quickly here just a series of before and after photos of downtown and over-the-Rhine. This is Fountain Square. This is an old SRO we converted into a hotel called the 21C out of Louisville. An old restaurant that shut down. Everybody thought it was the end of downtown, that we've converted into a 3-complex entertainment facility. Here's the new office building that we built on a underutilized parking lot in the center of the city. And this is what we purchased in over-the-Rhine. These buildings that we've converted into restaurants and condos were really just in terrible terrible shape. We went in, we bought them, we cleaned them up, we really bought most of them over a 2-year period where we bought maybe 200 buildings and 170 vacant lots, cleaned them up, boarded them up, secured them, and almost immediately crime dropped by about 50% because the criminal activity was happening in these buildings. We bought a lot of the carryouts where if you laid a crime map over the neighborhood, you could see that most of the criminal activity was happening in these carryout shops, that once we bought the building, closed the business down, the crime went away. And you can see these condos and apartments are, in the beginning, in 2007, 6, we were selling for about $150 a square foot, where they're now selling for north of $300 a square foot, which we always felt when we got to that point, the private community would be able to come in and sort of X meets Y in terms of what it costs to bring these old buildings back into shape and what you can eventually sell them for and lease them for. This is the park in the heart of over-the-Rhine that sits in front of our music hall, which is home to all of our performing arts organizations. That today is a big hub of activity that has encouraged more private development around the park. That's a before picture, and the children's playground today. And again, this was a playground where children did not come to play before the park was renovated. And then here are a series of, this is what we purchased. This is what the neighborhood looked like before we came in, purchased the buildings, and cleaned them up. A lot of vacancy, a lot of poorly managed buildings that today we've brought back into use as mixed-use projects with commercial street-level activity and the condos and apartments above. And again, I think the difference here is, unlike Greenville and Bethlehem, there has been some private-public partnership going on, but these projects have really all been because of this CDC funded by the major corporations that are headquartered in Cincinnati. And I think Tom has been the one really helping us tell this story in sort of a little-known community that has grown significantly in the past 10 years.
Thank you. Thanks, Anastasia. So there you have 3 remarkable examples of intentionality, of communities that made a really very clear choice that they wanted to be something other than what they were. I've had an opportunity to have visited all 3, and I think what you've heard are different models. I think what is particularly for me interesting about the Cincinnati model is this is a group of business leaders that didn't wait for the mayor, is that they said, we can be the leaders in this. And so often people wait for the mayor, and the mayor might or might not lead. And in this case, the mayor was a partner and willing to be a partner, but largely being driven by the private sector. And I think it is a model that has real importance to many cities in America. And cities say, well, we don't have Procter & Gamble, but every city has some companies and some wealth that if they come together and share a vision. So do you have any questions for each other?
I have a question for Anastasia. You touched on this, but I'm curious to know how you're gauging success and that critical mass of when you feel like you can take that, let the private sector take over, and then at what point, when that happens, where will you go? Not you personally, but what other good can you do in the community?
So of all the property that we purchased in those first couple of years that I was talking about, the 200 buildings, 170 lots, and obviously we've done a little bit of acquisition since then, but the bulk of that has been redeveloped or it's under construction right now. There are a handful of sort of scattered site buildings that we have hung on to that we haven't redeveloped, that we now have a program in place to sell those buildings, because there's a ton of interest now in the neighborhood that it has come back and over the Rhine from individuals, private developers that want to come in and sort of be a part of the action. And we have tracked over the years sort of the money put into it, what it cost us not just to purchase the property, but then the carrying costs for the past decade, that we've sort of spread around these properties so that we can recoup that and are selling to private developers. That now, like I said, when you can sell a condo for north of $300 a square foot, it starts to make sense. I mean, the cost to bring these old buildings back, the remediation work, starts to make sense. And so we have entered that market. At the same time, we don't have an exit strategy because there's so many empty teeth still that we need to fill in both the CBD and over the Rhine that, we're not going to expand the boundaries of what we're working on. There's
So
just a
you
lot
don't
of
feel
work
like
left to
the
do.
development community, private development community has gotten to that point where they want to buy those lots?
Yeah, it absolutely is
older
getting
buildings?
there. And in fact, we've attracted interest from neighboring cities like Indianapolis. We've got a couple private developers from Indy that are doing projects in town. There are a lot of projects. There's literally cranes all over downtown right now, and it isn't just 3 CDC work. So I think it's starting to attract that.
You've also got sort of the operational management side that just with your existing assets.
Well, and that's what I think our board really looks at all the time is there an exit strategy from that asset management?
Absolutely.
At what point do we feel like it's a stabilized enough retail environment that we can move away?
Because you really
from
start
that?
getting off
And
mission
I don't think
then.
we're there yet. But.
There was a common theme also, I think it's important, I want to ask each of you to comment on, is the programming. Is that you've built great places, but there's also been a real focus on creating activity that bring people to that area that then begins to feed on itself. And so you might want to
Yeah,
start
and
in a section.
I was curious about that with your project is, who does that programming and the concerts and in the park?
Well, we were fortunate that this organization that started this sort of tiny festival back in '83 as a boost in the on the arm to the city.
So it's like a nonprofit
They are a
group that-
not-for-profit group. They are the largest arts organization in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. They've got an $18 million budget, and so the festival that they run over 10 days helps sustain the overall operation over the course of the year. But that Arts Quest facility is a money-making operation. They do weddings and corporate events there, and they sell tickets for those events. So they have become kind of the arts and cultural arm of the city. They're not affiliated with the city directly, but they
closely with
and that Levitt Pavilion. They were already doing a great deal of free concerts, so to qualify for that foundation money, you had to do 50 free concerts a year. So we meet that. It didn't take much to get us to that 50 number. And they also, there's a Friends of the Levitt Pavilion. It's another sort of sub not-for-profit within the Arts Quest overall organization, and they handle the programming and fundraising for those free concerts as well.
So does Levitt, is it an ongoing support or was it a one-time grant?
It is the bulk of it was up front, and then they kind of give you some advice.
So to talk a little bit about Fountain Square and just the sheer number of programs you're doing a year also.
Yeah, we produce 3 CDC, and we've got our own event and sponsorship team, but we produce over 800 events a year in Fountain Square and Washington Park. And we're under construction right now on this new park, Ziegler Park, and a performing arts facility called Memorial Hall, which we will also manage. So we will double that in the next 18 months or so. But each thing is its own entity. So Fountain Square is a $5 million operation. If you take out the garage, there's a 600 space parking garage underneath it. If you take out that, that's a $2.5 million operation, and the revenue from the garage goes back towards paying down the debt that was created to renovate the space. So the $2.5 million on the plaza level is, mostly the revenue comes from sponsorship, grants, and concession sales. We sell a lot of beer at our events, and then we produce these free. We don't have ticket sales. There's no ticket sale revenue from that, so it needs to come from sponsorship.
And Steve, what about in Greenville? There's a lot of.
Well, I use the word intentional. It was very intentional. The community was designed, the downtown area was designed almost to be framed by the museum district, the baseball stadium that was built into a mixed-use facility, a program, the arena that has indoor, and then the performing arts centers that are throughout. We like to think of Greenville as one entire performing arts district because there is something going on. I think there's 10 performing arts centers at downtown at various levels of staging, but there's something going on every day. In the spring, all the way through the fall, one block somewhere in downtown is closed off with it's either arts or music or something, a lot of beer drinking going on. But people just love to be out of town, and what we find is that applications are being made, permits are being made for others to come in and want to do things as well. Of course, and I think you probably saw a couple of the festivals, the Artisphere Festival and the Fall for Greenville Festival are both top 10 festivals in the country.
So part of the lesson of this is that we all tend to focus on the real estate and placemaking, ULI's sweet spot, but there's also then of creating reasons why people want to come to a great place, and often we overlook that, I think, as people involved in development. I'm going to open it up for a few questions.
David Fleming from Birmingham. Thank you all for being here, and I have about 3 questions I'll throw out, and you can handle them the way you want. And one, I think you've already sort of addressed, Anastasia, about what your exit strategy is for what you're doing, and I appreciate those thoughts if you have any more about that. But for you particularly, how have you had to deal with the G word of gentrification in a neighborhood like over-the-rhine and bringing more values, and is that doing anything to, are you having to do anything to preserve maybe local or what was existing already in terms of business and folks? And the final thing is I heard a lot of you talk about TIF, tax increment financing, or tax credits. How has self-assessment districts or bids played into your strategies? I don't think any of you are one specifically, but you may have those in those places that you partner with. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'll take the gentrification question first. It has been a struggle for us in terms of more of a PR thing. We, from the very beginning, have been dedicated to preserving the existing affordable housing in the neighborhood, but creating better quality, like sort of changing the management of it, better capitalization, so that we have more quality affordable housing in the neighborhood. And so preserving the existing, but really trying to encourage the upgrade of the existing. We have added slightly to the affordability count. We've done a couple of mixed income projects with McCormick Bear and Salazar out of St. Louis. And we've done, again, the homeless facilities, if you would consider those affordable housing. And we've done some workforce housing in partnership with another developer in town. But the majority of what we've done to date has been introducing that market rate element that didn't exist before, and that home ownership. And yeah, it's changing the face of the neighborhood. It has completely changed the face of the neighborhood, and there's been a lot of discussion that we have participated in as much as we can about what that means for the neighborhood moving forward. Whenever we've done a public civic space project, we've engaged all the community groups that surround it to participate in the discussion of what they want their space to become and how it needs to be programmed. And so we do a lot of those community engagement kind of discussions. We are in our pipeline right now embarking on a new affordability. We just actually got approval on the strategy from our board yesterday on that will add about 360 new affordable units to the neighborhood. But what we're focused on is a deconcentration of the existing. Right now there's these scattered site, completely, the 1970s idea of just corralling everybody into one building or one development. And so this whole mixed income development, spreading the HAP contracts around so that everybody feels a part of the clean, safe nature of the neighborhood. And this is a focus of ours in the next 18 months or so on this.
So I'll respond to that as well. In Greenville, where there has been so much success now, and an interesting stat, 22.4% of the people that work in downtown Greenville live within 1 mile of there. And so you can imagine the pressure on residential housing that has occurred. Everybody wants to be there. They want to be, it used to be a 0-hour city, then an 8-hour city, now it's an 18-hour city. And it's a town of 50,000 people. But there's 1.3 million people live around it, but it's still a city of 50,000 people. I had said earlier when the pictures were all being run, all of that was done by local developers. That was true until podium-style apartments hit the market. And now in the last 2 years and what's been built and what's been planned, there's something like 4,000 units that have been built or are being planned. And when you have that kind of density and you have acreage, residential acreage, our multifamily properties selling for $2.5 to $3 million an acre, you have a real problem with gentrification in those markets. And we've really experienced that. We have an area by the ball field called the West End, and that was the natural area for growth to go, as a collection of older buildings and some really unique pocket neighborhoods that people had lived there forever and a long time, and so they were entrenched in their communities. And those areas are getting wiped out now. So that's an unintended consequence. And there is finally, in the South, it's really hard to talk about telling people what to do with their property. So zoning and these overlay districts, it's a real sensitive subject. And a lot of people want to say, we're so successful, why would we do that? Why do we need those guidelines? But I think everyone is starting to realize now that affordable housing, being sensitive to that, making sure we're inclusive with all types is really what makes a downtown area great. And you can't be so commercially uniform with a certain type. You can't just have a bunch of rich people there.
But it's also really difficult to do affordable housing, and I think that obviously the housing advocates that are always, we've got to keep this a mixed income neighborhood, don't always realize the difficulty of it, and and getting the LIHTC and the HAP and the and layering them in a way that makes the project make sense, and it's not easy.
John, do you have any comments?
We had some concerns of it being a low moderate income area. There has been a fair amount of investment on the periphery of the steel site, all market rate, and there was some concern about gentrification. The interesting thing about these sites is that there's so much opportunity, they're vacant, and there's an opportunity to introduce new housing and income diversity without necessarily having to push anybody else out. So we're not to the point of Greenville yet, but it's been talked about, and so far we've been able to manage it because it's been.
I think what is interesting is in Cincinnati, certainly in over-the-rhine, and in Bethlehem, and earlier on in Greenville, is that there was no market rate housing in these places. It was all affordable. And so now it is interesting, and that has become the challenge. That's sort of in some ways the measure of success, right? And the bid question, the business improvement district, maybe you want to address that. I would say that Cincinnati is a business improvement district in effect on steroids.
We have a bid that is, the geographic boundaries are the green square that was the central business district. So it stops at Central Parkway, which is the southern border of this over-the-Rhine neighborhood. So there is no bid in over-the-Rhine, it's in the CBD. And it's a $2.5 million SID, it's a special improvement district. The property owners, it's generated from all the property owners within that geographic boundary. And it really was sort of the predecessor to 3CDC. It was never funded in the way that we are, but really they created the TIF districts that have paved the way for a lot of this work. Really we're focused on retail recruitment and retention, and office recruitment and retention, and marketing a downtown that really tried to make it look fun when there really wasn't anything fun going on down there at the time. That is now a clean and safe, really focused solely on clean and safe in that central business district.
Originally UDAG grants and several TIFs, successful TIFs, and other ways to incentivize success taxes that have worked, seem to work pretty well, but no bids.
I didn't forget you.
No, that's fine.
Go ahead, your turn.
Seth Adams, Warner's Way Development from the Finger Lakes region in upstate New York. I've recently moved back to my old homeland of upstate New York, and I'm working in some small cities. I'm hearing all these great ideas, and they mirror what I experienced in Fort Worth, Texas, where I ran and operated a business for 25 years.
You might get closer to the microphone.
What I would like to have addressed is, how do small cities even approach developing a CDC? How are they formed, and how can I help kickstart one in a small city in upstate New York?
Do you guys have CDCs?
I think you're the CDC expert.
I don't know if I'm the expert on the formation of a CDC, but there's certain guidelines that you need to fall under. It's a nonprofit. As a community development organization, you can apply for those new markets tax credits, and both federal and state, if your state has them. I don't know how you go about beginning one, to be honest.
I think it really is really fundamentally a 501c3, so it's the same process as any other nonprofit would do. And your mission, the business community in this case is...
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think ours is a little bit unique in that sense. And again, in all the cities we've been visiting and sort of talking about our story in Cincinnati, I have yet to see that model of 30, 40 different organizations that are pooling their funds to form that CDC.
I've done some consulting with some small towns, and then ULI has done a lot of these, not advisory service panels, but the TAPs, technical advisory panels, which are the smaller ones that come in and look at these towns. And I know in the South, a lot of towns have done that. And how do we do this? And we see what these other communities are doing. It's a tough thing. The issue really is it's about jobs. If you're a job generator, if there are jobs there and there's job growth, you can get these things done and people are willing to invest. But if you don't have the job generation, it's just a really, really hard thing.
So I want to thank our three panelists because I think it's a remarkable story. Why don't you join me? And I thought the last question particularly, for every community, they are struggling to define their place in the world. And how that happens, it's about leadership and vision, of knowing what you want and where does the leadership come from. And in some cases, it came from a mayor. In some cases, a partnership between the political and the private sector, and in many cases, from the private sector. And I've been to some cities in upstate New York and other areas of the country that have sort of given up in a way. We don't know what to do. And I think what we are saying is there are great examples, and learn from them, of cities that were in your same position and made a decision in a different kind of way.